On a cold morning in March of 1981, at a salvage auction in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, a man named Vernon Kasper made what everyone agreed was the worst decision of the day. He paid $1,400 cash for a 1946 Diamond T coal truck that hadn't run in 8 years. The truck sat at the back of the salvage yard like a monument to failure, black paint peeling down to bare metal. The coal bed rusted through in 3 places. The tires rotted. Someone had spray-painted scrap metal across both doors in white letters that had faded but never disappeared. The auctioneer barely wanted to call it. Last item, folks. 1946 Diamond T coal hauler. No title, no guarantees, sold for parts or scrap weight. Do I hear $500? Silence. Come on, somebody needs this iron. $300. Nothing. $200 and I'll help you load it. Vernon Kasper raised his hand. $1,400. The yard went quiet, then someone laughed, then everyone did. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, did you say $1,400? $1,400 cash. The laughter got louder. Who pays 14 times the opening bid for scrap metal with wheels? Vernon walked to the cashier's table and counted out 14 $100 bills, most of what he had in the bank. He took his receipt and walked toward his purchase. That's when Tommy Vickland found him. Tommy was the son of the International Harvester dealer in Sheboygan. 28 years old, drove a new Scout, wore clean Dickies that had never seen a wrench. He sold trucks to contractors and farmers who could afford monthly payments. He had opinions about men who made bad investments. Vernon Kasper, Tommy said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. I just heard you paid $1,400 for that pile of rust. Vernon nodded. You know what $1,400 buys you at my father's dealership? A down payment on a real truck, an International Lodestar, something that runs, something you could actually work with. I can work with this one. Tommy laughed. Work with it. Vernon, that truck hasn't moved in 8 years. The motor's seized. The frame's probably cracked. You're buying rust with wheels, old man. Vernon looked at Tommy Vickland, at his clean clothes, at his soft hands, at his confident smirk. Son, Vernon said quietly, your father sells trucks to men who need them. I fix trucks other men throw away. There's a difference. He walked past Tommy toward the Diamond T, leaving the dealer's son standing with his mouth open. Behind him, Vernon could hear the laughter spreading across the salvage yard. Let me tell you about Vernon Kasper, because you need to understand the man before you can understand what happened next. Vernon was born in 1923, the third son of a German immigrant coal dealer in Milwaukee. His father, Otto Kasper, had run a small coal distribution business through the Depression, hauling anthracite from the rail yards to homes and businesses across the city. Vernon grew up in the cab of coal trucks. By the time he was 12, he could back a truck into an alley narrower than the wheelbase. By 16, he could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. By 18, he was running routes while his older brothers were overseas fighting. Otto died in 1956. Vernon inherited the business, 2 aging trucks, and a customer list that was shrinking every year as oil and natural gas replaced coal for heating. By 1981, Vernon was 58 years old and down to 1 working truck, hauling aggregate and construction materials to stay in business. He needed a second truck. New trucks cost $35,000. Good used trucks were $8,000 to $12,000. Vernon had $1,600 in the bank. Then he heard about the Sheboygan salvage auction. The 1946 Diamond T had belonged to a coal company that went bankrupt in 1973. The truck had sat in their yard for 8 years, weathering, rusting, waiting for someone to claim it or cut it up. Vernon didn't know anything about the truck's history. He just knew that a Diamond T frame was built like a bridge girder. He knew the coal bed could be repaired. He knew he could find a motor. And he knew that $1,400 was all he could afford. What he didn't know was that the truck's previous owner had hidden something inside it, something sealed away for decades, something worth more than anyone at that auction could have imagined. But that discovery was 22 years away. First, Vernon had to get the truck running. Let me tell you about the first 6 months, because that's when most men would have admitted defeat. Vernon hired a rollback to haul the Diamond T to his shop in West Bend. The truck barely fit on the flatbed. When they finally got it into his barn, the scale of the project became clear. The inline-6 Hercules engine was locked solid. 8 years of sitting had turned the oil to tar and welded the pistons to the cylinder walls. The fuel system was corroded. The electrical system was destroyed. The coal bed would need complete replacement. Vernon spent the first week just staring at it, making lists, calculating costs. Then he remembered what his father used to say: "A truck is just a collection of problems. You solve them one at a time until it moves." The first problem was the engine. Vernon pulled it over 3 weekends in April, using a come-along and a hand-built A-frame. He found a replacement Hercules engine in a scrapyard near Green Bay. The yard wanted $600. Vernon offered $400 and 2 days of welding work. The yard owner agreed. For the next 4 months, Vernon rebuilt that Diamond T in the hours between hauling jobs. He worked by trouble light in the evenings. He worked all day Saturday. He worked Sunday afternoons after church. He rebuilt the engine. He fabricated a new coal bed from sheet steel. He rewired the entire truck with his own hands. He found tires, brakes, lights. The neighbors thought he was crazy. Tommy Vickland drove past once, saw Vernon installing pistons in 100-degree August heat, and shook his head like a man watching a fool dig a hole to nowhere. By October of 1981, 7 months after the auction, Vernon had the Diamond T ready for its first test. He climbed into the cab on a Saturday morning. The seat was cracked but solid. The steering wheel was scarred but straight. He'd rebuilt everything that mattered. Vernon turned the key. The Hercules engine cranked twice, coughed, and roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. Black smoke poured from the stack. The whole barn shook. Vernon sat there with both hands on the wheel, listening to an engine he'd brought back from the dead, and allowed himself a small smile. The truck ran. Let me tell you about the next 21 years, because that's where the real story lives. From 1981 to 2003, Vernon Kasper hauled with that 1946 Diamond T. He didn't get rich. He just worked. Aggregate, sand, gravel, demolition debris. The jobs nobody wanted. The loads that didn't pay enough for the big companies to bother with. The Diamond T became known around Sheboygan County. Contractors would see it coming and know Vernon was behind the wheel. Reliable, on time, no excuses. The truck aged, but it didn't quit. Vernon maintained it the way some men maintain marriages. Every 1,000 miles he checked the frame. Every season he changed the fluids. Every year he went through the brake system. He never touched the fuel tank. It was a welded steel tank, original equipment, and it didn't leak. Vernon's philosophy was simple: if it works, leave it alone. That fuel tank had been on the truck since 1946, 55 years. Through the coal company years, through 8 years of sitting in a salvage yard, through 21 years of Vernon's hauling. Nobody had ever opened it except to fill it with diesel. Until the spring of 2003. Vernon was 79 years old by then. His son, Dale, had been working in the business for 15 years. They were talking about retirement, about winding down, about maybe selling the Diamond T to someone who'd appreciate it. But first, they needed to deal with a problem. The fuel tank had developed a leak. Not a big one, just a slow seep from a rust-through spot on the bottom edge. Vernon had been watching it for 6 months, adding a quart of diesel every few weeks to compensate. In March of 2003, the leak got worse. Vernon couldn't ignore it anymore. "We need to replace that tank," Dale said. Vernon nodded. The tank had lasted 57 years. That was a good run for any piece of steel. They ordered a replacement tank from a fabricator in Milwaukee. While they waited for it to arrive, they began the removal process. On a Saturday morning in April, Vernon and Dale drained the fuel, disconnected the lines, and unbolted the tank from its cradle beneath the frame. The tank was heavier than it should have been. Vernon noticed it immediately when they lifted it off. A fuel tank that's been drained shouldn't weigh this much. They set it on the shop floor. Vernon looked at it for a long moment. "Something's not right," he said. Dale tapped the side of the tank with a wrench. The sound was wrong, muffled in some places, hollow in others. Vernon got his cutting torch. He cut carefully along the top seam of the tank, peeling back the steel like opening a can. The smell of old diesel filled the shop, but beneath that smell was something else. Oil, preservation oil. Vernon looked inside the tank. What he saw made him set down the torch and call Dale over. At the bottom of the tank, welded to the interior, was a second compartment, a false bottom, sealed with lead solder, waterproof, airtight. Someone had built a hidden chamber inside the fuel tank, designed to survive decades submerged in diesel fuel. Vernon's hands were shaking when he cut through the lead seal. Inside the hidden compartment, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in wax, were packages. Vernon pulled out the first one, unwrapped it under the shop light. Gold coins, American double eagles, St. Gaudens design, 1920s dates, uncirculated condition. Dale made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Vernon pulled out the second package, more gold coins, pre-1933, some in paper rolls, some in small leather pouches. The third package was different. Bonds, Prohibition-era bearer bonds, ornate printing, no names, whoever held them owned them. The fourth package was a ledger, handwritten, leather-bound, water-stained but readable. Vernon sat down on a milk crate and opened the ledger. The first page read, "Property of J.M. Root Log and Accounts, 1928-1934. Vernon and Dale spread everything out on the workbench. They counted it twice. They couldn't believe the total. 47 gold coins. Most were common date St. Gaudens double eagles, but 3 were 1927D, a scarce date, and one was a 1933 double eagle, one of the rarest and most valuable American coins ever made. The bonds had matured decades ago, but some still held collector value. The ledger was filled with roots, dates, payments, names, Chicago addresses, Milwaukee addresses, references to shipments and deliveries that were clearly code for something illegal. Vernon sat in his shop, surrounded by 70-year-old evidence of Prohibition-era smuggling, and tried to process what he'd found. Let me tell you what Vernon learned, because the story behind the treasure was darker and stranger than he'd imagined. Vernon spent the next 2 weeks researching. He visited the Milwaukee Public Library. He talked to historians at the Wisconsin Historical Society. He found old newspaper archives. The initials J.M. matched a man named Joseph Markovich, a coal dealer who'd operated in Milwaukee during Prohibition. Joseph had run a legitimate coal business as a front for bootlegging operations. He'd hauled liquor from Canada, hidden in coal shipments, distributing it to speakeasies across Wisconsin and Illinois. Joseph Markovich had connections to the Capone organization in Chicago. The ledger confirmed it. Routes to Chicago addresses, payments to names that matched known Capone associates. Joseph had been smart. He'd never been arrested. He'd converted his illegal profits to gold and bonds, the only currencies that couldn't be traced or taxed. And he'd hidden his fortune in the one place nobody would ever look, the fuel tank of his coal truck. Joseph Markovich died in 1934, shot in an alley in Milwaukee. The murder was never solved. The coal business was sold off. The truck changed hands several times, eventually ending up with the coal company that went bankrupt in 1973. For 69 years, Joseph Markovich's fortune had traveled with that truck, through owners who never knew, through salvage yards and auctions, through Vernon's 21 years of hauling, until a rust hole forced Vernon to cut open the tank and find what had been hidden since 1934. Vernon had the coins and bonds appraised by 3 different experts. The consensus was clear. Total value, $156,000. The 1933 Double Eagle alone was worth $75,000 to the right collector. The other coins added another $40,000. The rare bonds brought the rest. Vernon Kasper, who'd paid $1,400 for scrap metal, had found a fortune in the fuel tank. Now let me tell you what Vernon did with the money, because this is where character reveals itself. Vernon could have kept it all. Legally, he'd bought the truck. Whatever was in it was his. $156,000 would change his retirement, would set up his son, would finally make that $1,400 auction purchase look smart. But Vernon didn't keep it all. He donated half to the Wisconsin Historical Society, $78,000, the largest single donation the society had received in 20 years. He specified that the money be used to preserve Prohibition-era history. The ledger, the bonds, and 2 of the coins went with the donation, creating a permanent exhibit about Milwaukee's bootlegging past. He kept the other half, used part of it to fully restore the Diamond T, used part of it to upgrade his shop equipment, put the rest in the bank for retirement. But before he deposited anything, Vernon did one more thing. He drove the Diamond T to the International Harvester dealership in Sheboygan. Tommy Vickland still worked there, 50 years old now, manager of the parts department. His father's dealership had been sold to a national chain in the 90s. Tommy was just another employee now. Vernon walked into the parts department and asked for Tommy by name. Tommy came out from the back. He looked at Vernon. Recognition flickered. "Mr. Kasper." "Tommy, what can I do for you?" Vernon handed him a newspaper clipping. The Wisconsin State Journal had run a story about Vernon's discovery. Local man finds $156,000 in vintage truck. Tommy read it. His face went pale. "The truck you called scrap metal," Vernon said quietly. "The one you laughed at. The one you said I was a fool for buying." Tommy couldn't speak. "I didn't come here to gloat," Vernon said. "I came here to tell you something my father taught me. He said, never mock a man's work. You don't know what he sees that you don't." Vernon turned and walked out. Tommy Vickland stood in the parts department, holding the newspaper clipping, watching through the window as Vernon climbed into the 1946 Diamond T and drove away. Let me tell you about the years that followed, because the story doesn't end at the fuel tank. The Diamond T restoration became Vernon's final project. He stripped it to the frame and rebuilt it properly. New coal bed fabricated from stainless steel. Engine fully rebuilt. Paint professionally done in period-correct black and gold. By 2005, the truck looked better than it had in 1946. Vernon took it to truck shows, county fairs, historical society events. Everywhere he went, people wanted to hear the story. The $1,400 auction, the Mockery, the 21 years of work, the fuel tank discovery. Vernon told the story the same way every time. Simple, factual, no embellishment needed. In 2008, the Wisconsin Historical Society opened its Prohibition exhibit. The centerpiece was Joseph Markovich's ledger, displayed in a climate-controlled case, open to a page listing Chicago deliveries in 1931. Next to the ledger, 2 of the gold coins, a photograph of the fuel tank compartment, and a placard explaining how a truck driver named Vernon Kasper had discovered Milwaukee's hidden bootlegging history by refusing to throw away a truck everyone else called scrap. Vernon attended the opening. He was 85 years old. He gave a short speech about the importance of preserving working-class history, even when that history involved breaking the law. Joseph Markovich was a criminal, Vernon said, but he was also a working man who understood trucks, roots, and survival. That's worth remembering. Tommy Vickland was there. He'd driven down from Sheboygan. He waited until the crowd thinned, then approached Vernon. "Mr. Kasper," Tommy said, "I owe you an apology. I owed you one 27 years ago, but I was too proud to give it." Vernon looked at him. "You were young." "I was wrong, and I've spent 27 years thinking about what you said, about not mocking a man's work." Vernon shook his hand. "Took you a while to learn it, but you learned it." Tommy nodded. "That truck taught me more than any sale I ever made." Vernon Kasper died in 2014 at the age of 91. His funeral was held at the same church where his father's funeral had been held 58 years earlier. Dale Kasper inherited the business and the Diamond T the truck still runs. Dale starts it once a month, drives it around West Bend, keeps it maintained the way his father taught him. In 2019, a museum in Milwaukee offered Dale $80,000 for the Diamond T full restoration cost covered, permanent display, climate-controlled building. Dale said no. "My father paid $1,400 for this truck when everyone said he was a fool," Dale told them. He found $156,000 in the fuel tank 22 years later, but the real value isn't the money, it's the lesson. The museum curator asked what lesson. That the men who laugh earliest usually understand the least. The Diamond T is still in West Bend, still in the Kasper family, still running. Every year on the anniversary of the fuel tank discovery, Dale drives it to the Wisconsin Historical Society, parks it in front of the Prohibition exhibit, and lets visitors sit in the cab where Vernon sat for 21 years before finding the fortune. On the dashboard, Dale keeps a small brass plaque. It reads, $1,400 for scrap metal, $156,000 in the tank, priceless lesson learned. Let me end this story where it began, at an auction. In March of 1981, a man paid $1,400 for a truck everyone called scrap metal. The crowd laughed. The dealer's son mocked him. The consensus was clear. Vernon Kasper had made a terrible mistake. But Vernon understood something the crowd didn't. He understood that value isn't always visible, that history hides in unexpected places, that the work of restoring something broken teaches you more than buying something new ever will. He drove that truck for 21 years, hauled hundreds of loads, kept his business alive, never knew he was driving over a fortune. And when he finally discovered what was hidden in the fuel tank, he did something the laughing crowd would never have expected. He shared it, gave half away, turned a criminal's hidden gold into public history. The dealer's son learned that mockery has a cost. The salvage auction learned that scrap metal sometimes carries secrets. And Vernon Kasper learned what his father already knew. The greatest fortunes aren't always the ones you're looking for. Sometimes they're hidden in the fuel tank of a truck everyone else called junk. The men who laughed thought they understood value. Vernon understood something deeper. He understood that patience, work, and respect for old things will outlast every confident prediction. The dealer laughed at scrap metal. The scrap metal held $156,000. And the man who believed in it became exactly what his father hoped he'd be. Honest, patient, proven right.